Wow. And
Any other
let me remind you
questions?
that the tanning industry was the only one without a lobby in Washington, D.C.
I bet they have one now.
I bet they do too. Okay.
He might get tanned. He might get burned. A very brown lobby. Very.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Lord.
Well, okay.
Boy, I see where this is going.
Okay. How do we get back, Carrie?
Yeah.
Taxing the rich. What's the rich?
I would support increase of taxes on people who make like $250,000 or more a year. Reality is, a decade ago we lowered the top end, and we need to put more progressive taxation in our income tax. When you look proportionally, the working poor pay a higher percentage than the wealthiest in the state of Minnesota of their income. So I would say we need to get rid of those deductions that we gave them 10 years ago, and everybody's going to have to hurt. I mean, that's just the way it is. We're all going to have to make sacrifices. We might have to do that with a more progressive income tax. We might have to do that with a tax on services and cuts in programs. Everybody's going to have to be part of the solution. And it's going to be very difficult in St. Paul listening to people why they shouldn't be part of it. But I think as Minnesotans, we all need to step up and give our contribution to solving this fiscal crisis, because frankly, it's been 20 years of fiscal irresponsibility.
Let me ask you this. On what basis do you say that the low-income pay a larger percentage of their tax? Don't a lot of low-income people get the earned income credit, that kind of thing? You and I had this discussion. So.
Right, but if you start talking about income taxes and sales taxes and those things, that's a higher proportion of service that they pay.
Okay.
Jen.
Carrie, in response to that, do we have any type of proportional survey to indicate how much of the services of the government that sector is paying, or that sector is utilizing to offset the amount of taxes that they're paying versus the amount of taxes that someone on the higher end would be paying in relation to the level of service that they're receiving?
To answer your question directly and honestly, I don't know, but you also need to look at who benefits from tax cuts the most. You know, that you have to compare both sides of that argument, because other people would argue the wealthy receive much more benefit from government than the poor. So you have to weigh all that, and it's going to be difficult. Like I said, everybody's going to have to contribute.
Jay.
Well, I was just thinking about that comment of the wealthy benefit. I think the poor benefit also because they have the services. I happen to be at that low end of the totem pole right now and working up. And so the system is set up to where it's the lowest income, the lowest people in poverty benefit, and the highest end. So there's this 1% on both ends, and the people in the middle get really screwed because they get taxed. And,
okay.
And it's
Don't mince words.
No, I mean it's true. I mean the people in the middle class are the ones that struggle the most and stuff because they have the most challenges to deal with and stuff. And one of the things on taxes, I think that if we work towards putting some kind of a flat tax, and I'm not that educated enough to totally understand it, but a flat tax from what I've read about and understood would be a better, you know, like a 10% across the board would be a much more fair way to do that.
So you're not really for Carrie's plan of progressive taxation?
No, I don't think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
Roger, Harry, do you guys have any comment on that?
Well, I mean, just quickly to add into Andy and Carrie's conversation, that the figure that Carrie uses, one of the big pieces of that is property tax. As you go lower on the income scale, the bigger the chunk is of property tax. So when people see a 13% versus a 4.5% property tax is a big. And what we've seen in the last 8 years is a huge shift in terms of funding state things from state income tax to local property tax. And anyone who's watched local government knows that that's the case. The figures amounted to something like almost $4 billion over the last 8 years has been pushed down to local property taxes. I was thumbing through an article that was in Time magazine a couple weeks ago about states being in horrible fiscal condition. And it's kind of a source of shame, maybe, that Minnesota is one of the 10 worst in the country right now. You know, we've thrown out the figure, it's probably $7.2 billion deficit in the next biennium, and that's no stimulus, that's no help. But let's change that figure around. it's 26.4%, over a quarter of the general fund that we're looking at being short coming in the next biennium. So in the cover of this article, they showed 10 different state capitals, and ours is one of those, and that's not really something that I would like to see. So as I've talked about this race, one of my goals, my main goal is I want to find stable fiscal footing for the state again. And we can go back, and it's really easy. I mean, it's hard to use words like enough. What is enough? And I think one of our challenges in Minnesota is we all of us as Minnesotans haven't stepped back and said, what is it that we want and how do we want to pay for it? Instead, we have conversations about a particular want, or we have conversations in opposition to a particular way to pay for it, but we need to have a more holistic conversation because we can talk about who uses what services, and it's pretty easy to define in some cases, but in others, what's a good road system, a good sewer system, a good water system, a good local quality of life, what value does that have to an employer? It has a lot.
How do you create that? I mean, how do you have that conversation?
In this polarized,
yeah. Because it seems in politics today, people are unable to have a conversation.
Well, one way you do it in the case of the school system is by making sure that you don't have any election for the biggest single school building project in the state's history. Obviously, we've solved all the problems in Duluth. Nobody's upset about it. We didn't have to mess around with an election about a red plan 2 or 3 years ago. The thing is, you're always going to have people who are going to complain about your taxes, and in the case of Duluth, those are all property taxes. And I know that the business community, at least the chamber, has taken a pretty positive tack towards the red plan, but you have to keep in mind that Duluth represents about 1, maybe 2% of all the students in the state of Minnesota. If we were to do across the state of Minnesota the same kind of building in all the other communities that we are financing here, it would cost between $40 billion. And
to go back to my question, Harry,
yeah.
How do you do it at the state level?
Well, this is a case where I know that in Wisconsin, for a short time in the 90s, they were paying for school building plans. They paid 2/3 of the cost of a lot of rebuilding in the Superior system. I do believe in keeping decisions local, and that way the local people know what they're going to have to pay. And in the case of the building of the current school district, we didn't get a chance to weigh in and decide whether we wanted to undertake that kind of expense, one that dwarfs the $7 billion spending shortfall the state faces. You have to have local participation, and you have to have honest discussions about costs, as somebody here suggested. You've got to talk about what you need.
But how do you have those discussions at a state level, not locally? How do you, when you go down to the Senate, how do you as a single body agenda those discussions?
Well, the sad fact of the matter is that you don't have real coherent discussions because you have 200-some legislators all fighting for their little piece of the pie. And that's why government gets so big, because it's very easy for somebody to pull something here that some other community is going to have to pay for through state taxation. What you have to have is the right frame of mind. Now, there'll be a lot of people here who know that my history has been one of the sad little petunia and the onion patch. I've been a Republican for most of my career. And about 5-6 years ago, I began attending Democratic precinct caucuses because I have been very frustrated that in the Republican community, there has been a severing of the recognition that if you're going to spend money, you've got to pay for things. We've been putting off our spending to new generations far in the future. That means our grandchildren will have to pay for a great many things. And I believe in what is, I guess, now become a Democratic mantra: you pay as you go. And as long as we keep buying stuff and don't taxing to pay for them, we're creating a huge sinkhole that future generations are going to suffer.